I shouldn't have gone to that wedding. That's the first thing I remember thinking the moment the music started and everyone around me stood up to celebrate a love story that didn't look anything like my life. The ballroom was glowing with soft golden lights, the kind that made everything look perfect in photographs, and the sound of glasses clinking echoed under a ceiling so high it felt like another world. I sat alone at a small round table near the back, fingers wrapped around a glass of sparkling water I couldn't afford to replace if I dropped it. My name is Emily Carter, 28 years old, single mom, part-time receptionist, and definitely not the kind of person who belonged in a place where the centerpieces probably cost more than my monthly rent. I had borrowed the dress from my cousin, a navy blue thing that fit well enough if I didn't breathe too deeply, and my heels pinched my feet every time I shifted in my chair. The bride had been my college roommate years ago, back before life became something heavier, back before Lily was born, and every decision I made revolved around keeping a tiny human safe and smiling. Across the room, people laughed easily, men in tailored suits and women in dresses that shimmered under the chandeliers. I watched them the way someone watches a movie they know they can't step into. Then I noticed the empty chair at the long table near the dance floor. It was the only seat no one had touched all night. People kept glancing at it like they were waiting for something. Waiting for someone. I overheard a whisper drift from the table behind me. Two women leaning close as if saying the name too loudly might summon a storm. Adrian Moretti hasn't arrived yet. The name didn't mean anything to me at the time, just another wealthy guest in a room full of them. I looked back down at my glass and reminded myself I only had to stay another 30 minutes before it would be polite to leave. 30 minutes, and I could go home to my small apartment, kick off these painful shoes, and check on Lily sleeping under her pink blanket. That thought made me smile softly. My daughter had fallen asleep clutching her stuffed rabbit before I left tonight, and the babysitter promised she'd text if anything changed. I was just about to reach for my purse when the music faltered slightly and a subtle ripple moved through the room. It wasn't loud. No one announced anything. But conversation slowed, heads turned, and that empty chair suddenly didn't look empty anymore. I glanced toward the entrance and saw him walk in. Tall, calm, dark suit that fit like it had been made specifically for him. He moved through the room with quiet confidence, not rushing, not trying to be noticed, yet every single person seemed aware of him. Adrian Moretti. The name floated back into my mind from the whisper I'd heard earlier. I looked away quickly, pretending to study the pattern on the tablecloth, hoping he'd pass by like every other stranger in this building. Instead, a moment later, a chair scraped softly across the floor beside me. I looked up and realized the most powerful man in the room had just chosen the only empty seat at my table. His voice was low, steady, almost curious when he spoke. "Why are you sitting here alone?" I blinked once because for a moment I thought he might be speaking to someone behind me. The question sounded too direct, too calm, like the kind of thing people asked when they already expected an answer. I slowly turned my head and realized there was no one else at the table. Just me and the man half the room had been whispering about. I cleared my throat quietly and tried to think of something normal to say. Something that did not reveal how out of place I felt sitting 3 feet away from him. I shrugged lightly and lifted my glass. I guess everyone else already found their people tonight. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Adrian Moretti watched me for a moment without speaking. His eyes were dark but not cold, observant in the way someone studies details others miss. Around us the music continued and laughter floated through the air again, but I could feel a strange bubble of quiet forming at our table. Not because he demanded attention, because people seemed to give it automatically. He leaned back slightly in his chair and glanced toward the crowded dance floor where the bride and groom were swaying slowly under the lights. "That is usually how weddings work," he said. "People arrive with someone, or they leave with someone." I let out a small laugh before I could stop myself. "Well, that explains why I am failing the assignment tonight." His mouth curved just enough to suggest he found that amusing. Then he looked back at me, studying my borrowed dress, my careful posture, the way my purse rested tightly against my side like it held everything important I owned. "You were invited, though," he said. I nodded. "College friend. We lost touch for a while, but she still sent the invitation. That happens when you are the person everyone forgets about until a major life event." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "Forgotten people do not usually show up anyway." I thought about that for a second. Maybe I just wanted a night where I remembered what it felt like to be part of something. even if it was only for a few hours. His gaze lingered on my face longer than I expected, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. Then he glanced again toward the large table near the dance floor where several men in tailored suits had been quietly watching him since he arrived. I noticed the shift instantly. Something about his posture changed. Not tense. Focused. When he looked back at me, his voice was softer but more deliberate. "Do you dance, Emily Carter?" The sound of my full name made my stomach drop slightly. I had definitely never introduced myself. I set my glass down slowly. "That is a very impressive trick." He gave a small shrug. "The seating chart is posted near the entrance. I simply read it when I arrived." That explanation made sense, but somehow it still felt like he noticed more than most people. I shook my head lightly. "I used to dance when I was younger. These days I mostly just chase a 6-year-old around the living room." The words slipped out before I realized I had said too much. Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. "A 6-year-old daughter." Lily. The name warmed my chest, even just saying it. He nodded slowly, absorbing that information the way someone stores pieces of a puzzle for later. Then he stood up without warning and extended his hand toward me. The gesture was calm but confident, like he expected the world to move when he did. "Come with me for one song." I looked up at him, surprised. The dance floor was filled with elegant couples who looked like they belonged in magazines. I gestured toward them awkwardly. "I really do not think I fit out there tonight." Adrian leaned slightly closer, so only I could hear him over the music. "Pretend you do. Just for a few minutes." I hesitated. Then I noticed something strange. The men at that distant table were watching us again. Not casually. Carefully. Adrian followed my glance briefly before returning his attention to me. His voice lowered another inch. "Pretend you are my wife and dance with me." For a moment I thought I had misheard him. The music from the band drifted across the ballroom, soft piano and violin blending together while couples swayed slowly under the chandeliers. "Pretend you are my wife and dance with me." The sentence echoed in my mind like something from a strange movie I had accidentally stepped into. I stared up at Adrian Moretti, trying to decide whether this was a joke that wealthy people played on strangers for entertainment. His hand remained extended toward me, steady and patient. He did not rush me. He did not smile either. He simply waited as if he already understood exactly how this moment would end. I glanced toward the dance floor again, and then back at the distant table where the men in tailored suits were still watching us. The way they observed Adrian was not casual curiosity. It was measured, quiet, almost calculating. Something about that made my chest tighten. I lowered my voice slightly. "Why would you need someone to pretend to be your wife?" Adrian followed my gaze briefly toward those men before returning his attention to me. When he spoke, his tone remained calm, but there was a subtle seriousness beneath it now. "Because tonight some people in this room are trying to figure out whether I am alone." That answer did not make my confusion disappear, but it did explain the tension I had sensed since he sat down. I looked at his outstretched hand again. "I am probably the worst choice you could have made for something like that. My shoes hurt, my dress is borrowed, and I am fairly certain everyone here can tell I do not belong." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "That is exactly why you are the perfect choice." The words caught me off guard. He tilted his head slightly toward the dance floor where elegant couples spun beneath the warm lights. "Those people expect me to arrive with someone who looks like them. Someone polished. Someone predictable." He paused for half a second before continuing quietly. "Instead, I will arrive with someone real." I blinked. No one had described me that way in a long time. Real. My first instinct was still to refuse. I was not the type of person who pretended to be part of someone else's complicated life. I had a daughter waiting at home and a routine built around grocery lists, school mornings, and bedtime stories. But then I looked again at the men across the room. They were still watching, and Adrian was still standing there patiently with his hand extended as if the entire ballroom could wait another minute for my decision. The band began a slower song, the kind couples usually chose for sentimental dances. Around us, chairs scraped softly as more guests moved toward the floor. I exhaled quietly and stood up from my chair. The heels protested immediately, but I ignored them. Adrian's hand closed gently around mine, steady and warm without being forceful. He guided me toward the dance floor with calm confidence, and as we stepped into the soft glow of the chandeliers, I felt every eye in the room shift toward us. I leaned slightly closer to him as we moved into the rhythm of the music. "I hope you realize I have absolutely no experience pretending to be someone's wife." Adrian placed his hand lightly at my side and answered in a voice only I could hear. Then you already have the most important part correct. I frowned slightly. And what part is that? His eyes flicked briefly toward the distant table before returning to mine. You are convincing enough that they will believe you. The moment we stepped onto the dance floor, I became aware of how quiet the room felt around us. Even though the music was still playing and people were still talking, Adrian guided me smoothly into the slow rhythm of the song, his movements effortless like someone who had done this 1,000 times before. I followed half a step behind, trying not to trip over my heels or the long edge of my borrowed dress. The chandelier light above us reflected softly off the polished floor, and for a second I forgot about the table of men watching us. All I could focus on was the strange reality that I was dancing in the center of a ballroom with a man I had met less than 5 minutes earlier. Adrian's hand rested lightly at my side, steady but respectful, while his other hand held mine with calm confidence. He moved us through the crowd slowly, careful not to draw attention with dramatic steps, yet somehow everyone seemed to notice him anyway. People made room without being asked. Couples shifted aside as if an invisible current followed him wherever he walked. I leaned slightly closer, so my voice would not carry beyond the music. Are you always this mysterious with strangers? Adrian glanced down at me, and for the first time I noticed something almost amused in his expression. Only on evenings when strangers are the safest company available. That answer made my eyebrows lift. That does not sound reassuring. It was not meant to be. We continued moving across the floor in a slow circle, the orchestra shifting into a softer melody that filled the space like warm air. I tried to match Adrian's rhythm and found it surprisingly easy. He guided without pressure, adjusting subtly whenever I stepped too far or hesitated. After a moment, he spoke again quietly. You are doing very well for someone who claims she does not belong here. I glanced down at my shoes and gave a small smile. I am pretending. Remember, that is what you asked for. Adrian's eyes flicked briefly toward the far side of the ballroom. I followed his gaze and noticed the same group of men standing near their table now, watching the dance floor with quiet attention. They were not smiling like the other guests. They were observing. Adrian's voice dropped slightly lower. Keep looking at me. Do not glance at them again. The calm way he said it made my stomach tighten. I forced my attention back to his face. The music slowed further, and couples around us drifted closer together in soft conversation. From the outside, it probably looked like we were another pair enjoying a wedding dance. Inside my head, 100 questions were racing. So these men over there, I whispered carefully, they are the reason you needed a pretend wife tonight. Adrian nodded once. Yes. Are they dangerous? The word slipped out before I could stop it. Adrian considered that question for a moment before answering. They are curious. And curiosity can sometimes lead people into decisions they regret. That answer told me almost nothing and somehow everything at the same time. I exhaled slowly and tried to keep my posture relaxed. My heart had begun to beat a little faster, but I reminded myself this was still just a wedding. A ballroom filled with families and music and flower arrangements that probably cost more than my car. Adrian's voice softened again as the song neared its final verse. Thank you for helping me tonight, Emily. You had every reason to walk away. I shrugged lightly. I almost did. His eyebrow lifted slightly. What changed your mind? I hesitated before answering honestly. You look like someone who does not ask for help very often. Adrian held my gaze for a long second, and something in his expression shifted again. Not guarded this time. Thoughtful. The music began to fade as the final notes echoed through the room. Around us, couples slowly stopped dancing, and applause rippled politely across the ballroom. Adrian did not release my hand immediately. Instead, he leaned slightly closer and spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. The difficult part of tonight is about to begin. The music ended and polite applause rolled across the ballroom like a soft wave, but Adrian did not move right away. His hand still rested lightly against mine, steady and warm, as if letting go too quickly might draw attention. I followed his gaze across the room and saw the group of men leaving their table. They moved slowly, not rushing, but there was something deliberate in the way they approached. The air around us felt different now. Not tense exactly. Focused. Adrian exhaled quietly. They noticed. I swallowed and kept my voice low. Noticed what? That I am not alone tonight. The men stopped a few feet away from us, just as another couple stepped off the dance floor. Up close they looked like any other well-dressed guests. Dark suits, polished shoes, the kind of people who blended easily into expensive events. But their attention was entirely on Adrian. The tallest of them smiled politely, the kind of smile people use when they are measuring every detail in front of them. Adrian. Moretti. I was wondering when you would arrive. Adrian nodded once, calm and composed. Daniel. Good evening. Daniel's eyes shifted toward me. Not rudely, just carefully, as if he were examining an unexpected detail in a painting. I do not believe we have met. Adrian did not hesitate. My wife, Emily. The word wife landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. I forced myself to smile politely and extended my hand the way I had seen people do all night. Nice to meet you. Daniel shook my hand gently. His expression remained pleasant but thoughtful. Emily Moretti. Adrian corrected him smoothly, without even looking at me. Carter. She kept her name. Something in Daniel's expression flickered for half a second, as if that small detail had surprised him. That is rare. Adrian shrugged slightly. Emily prefers it that way. I nodded as if that explanation had been discussed many times before. Around us the band began setting up for the next song, and the hum of conversation returned to the room. But Daniel and his companions seemed uninterested in anything except Adrian. We heard you might be attending tonight. Daniel continued casually. I was curious to see if the rumors were true. Adrian's voice remained calm. Rumors have a habit of exaggerating things. Daniel glanced briefly toward our joined hands before returning his attention to Adrian. Not this one apparently. He smiled again, but this time the smile looked satisfied, like someone who had just confirmed a small theory. Well then, congratulations. Weddings are inspiring events. They remind people of what matters. Adrian nodded politely. They do. For a moment no one spoke. Then Daniel stepped back slightly, giving a small respectful nod. Enjoy the evening, Adrian. Emily. With that he turned, and his companions followed him back toward their table. I did not breathe normally again until they were several yards away. Adrian finally released my hand and guided me toward the quieter edge of the ballroom, near the tall windows overlooking the city lights. My heart was still beating faster than usual. Was that convincing enough? Adrian looked back toward the distant table where Daniel and the others had resumed their seats. Yes. His tone sounded almost relieved. You were perfect. I leaned lightly against the window ledge and exhaled slowly. You realize you just introduced me as your wife in front of strangers who clearly know a lot about you. Adrian met my gaze calmly. I realize that. And if I may be honest, he added quietly, it may not be the last time tonight that someone believes it. For a moment neither of us spoke. The ballroom lights shimmered across the tall windows behind me, reflecting the city skyline like 1,000 tiny stars scattered across the glass. Somewhere across the room the band began another song, and guests drifted back toward the dance floor, laughing and raising glasses as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But my pulse had not slowed yet. I crossed my arms lightly and looked at Adrian. So let me understand this correctly. A few minutes ago, I was a stranger sitting alone at a table, and now several powerful-looking men believe I am your wife. Adrian leaned one shoulder against the window beside me, completely relaxed in a way that made the entire situation feel even stranger. That is a fairly accurate summary. I let out a quiet breath. That might be the most unexpected thing that has happened to me all year. Adrian studied my expression for a moment, as if deciding whether I was truly upset or simply processing the situation. You handled it better than most people would have. I raised an eyebrow. Most people probably would have walked out the moment you asked them to pretend. That would have been understandable. I glanced across the ballroom again toward Daniel and the others. They appeared to be talking among themselves now, occasionally glancing toward us, but no longer watching as closely as before. I lowered my voice slightly. Are they satisfied now? Adrian followed my gaze briefly. For tonight, yes. That answer made me tilt my head. For tonight. Adrian gave a small nod. They wanted to know whether certain rumors about my personal life were true. Seeing us together answered their question. I looked down at my shoes for a second before asking the obvious. And what exactly do they think that question was? Adrian's tone remained calm. Whether I had someone in my life who mattered enough to stand beside me in public. I laughed softly at that. Well, they definitely received an interesting answer. Adrian's eyes shifted back to me. You regret helping? I shook my head slowly. No. I just did not expect my quiet evening at a wedding to turn into something that sounds like a scene from a movie. A faint smile crossed his face again. Life occasionally surprises us that way. For a few seconds we both watched the dance floor in silence. The bride was laughing with her friends now, while the groom attempted an overly dramatic spin that made several guests cheer. The whole room felt warm and ordinary again. I leaned back slightly against the window and exhaled. I should probably head home soon. My babysitter is wonderful, but she is still a college student with early classes tomorrow morning. Adrian looked back at me with quiet interest. Lily is 6 years old, correct? I blinked once. You remember that already. Adrian gave a small shrug. Important details tend to stay with me. I studied him carefully now. For someone who had just involved a stranger in a complicated social performance, he seemed almost thoughtful, not calculating, just aware. You seem very calm for someone who just staged a fake marriage in the middle of a crowded ballroom, I said. Adrian glanced once more toward Daniel's table before answering quietly. Compared to most evenings in my world, this has been a remarkably peaceful solution. That statement made me pause. There was something deeper behind those words, something he chose not to explain. I pushed away from the window slightly and adjusted the strap of my purse on my shoulder. Well, I am glad your peaceful solution included good dancing at least. Adrian straightened as well, his attention returning fully to me. Before you leave tonight, Emily, there is something you should understand. I hesitated. What is that? Adrian's voice remained calm, but serious now. The people who saw us tonight will remember you. The people who saw us tonight will remember you. Adrian's words settled in the quiet space between us while the music continued across the ballroom. For a second I was not sure whether that statement was meant as a warning or simply a fact. I studied his face, trying to read the meaning behind the calm tone he always used. Remember me for what exactly? Adrian folded his hands loosely in front of him. For standing beside me. I let out a slow breath. That sounds like the kind of thing that usually leads to complications. It can, he admitted. But tonight it also solved a problem that might have become larger if they believed I was alone. I glanced again toward Daniel's table. The men there had relaxed slightly, speaking among themselves while occasionally lifting their glasses. From the outside, they looked like ordinary guests enjoying the reception. But the quiet attention in their eyes earlier had been impossible to miss. I looked back at Adrian. You realize my life is extremely ordinary, right? Tomorrow morning, I will wake up at 6:30, pack a lunchbox with apple slices and peanut butter sandwiches, and drive my daughter to school in a 10-year-old car that makes a strange noise every time I turn left. Adrian listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly, as if that information mattered more than anything else we had discussed tonight. That sounds like a very good life. I blinked, slightly surprised by that answer. Most people in this room would probably disagree. Most people in this room do not know what matters. His response came so naturally that it made me pause. The orchestra shifted into another upbeat song, and several guests began clapping along as a group of friends pulled the groom back toward the dance floor. The whole room filled with laughter again. I checked the small watch on my wrist and sighed quietly. I really should go soon. My babysitter texted earlier to say Lily fell asleep on the couch watching a cartoon. Adrian noticed the change in my posture immediately. You want to be home before she wakes up. Of course. That is the part of motherhood they never explain in parenting books. Even when your child is sleeping peacefully, you still feel responsible for the quiet of the whole house. Adrian watched me for a moment with an expression I could not quite identify. Respect perhaps. Or curiosity. Then he glanced once more toward Daniel and the others before turning back to me. If you leave now, they will assume you are going home together with me. I frowned slightly. But we are not. Correct. That means you will need to exit the ballroom with me anyway. I laughed softly at the absurdity of the situation. Of course I will. Otherwise your entire performance tonight would collapse at the door. Adrian's mouth curved into a small smile again. You are learning quickly. We stepped away from the window together and moved toward the edge of the ballroom. As we walked, several guests nodded politely to Adrian, while others glanced curiously at me, trying to place the unfamiliar woman beside him. I kept my expression calm, even though the whole experience still felt surreal. When we reached the tall doors leading toward the hotel lobby, Adrian slowed slightly. Before we step outside, there is one more thing you should know, Emily. I looked up at him. What is that? Adrian's voice lowered just enough that only I could hear it. Tonight you helped me create a story for those men to believe. The problem with convincing stories is that sometimes people start expecting them to continue. Stories should continue. Adrian's words followed me as we stepped through the tall ballroom doors, and into the quieter hotel lobby. The sudden change in noise felt strange after the music and laughter behind us. The lobby lights were softer, warm lamps reflecting off polished marble floors and tall glass walls that looked out over the city streets. For the first time that evening, I felt like I could breathe normally again. A few guests moved through the lobby toward the elevators while a hotel pianist played something slow and distant near the bar. Adrian walked beside me with the same calm presence he had carried all night. But here in the quieter space, the situation felt more real. I adjusted the strap of my purse on my shoulder and looked up at him. When you say stories continue, I assume that is not a good thing. Adrian glanced briefly back toward the ballroom doors before answering. It is not necessarily bad. It simply means people will watch for signs that the story they saw tonight was true. I shook my head softly, still trying to process the idea. While they are going to be disappointed tomorrow morning when they discover your wife drives a 10-year-old silver sedan and spends half her day answering phone calls at a medical office. Adrian's mouth curved slightly at that. Some people might find that refreshing. I laughed quietly as we stepped through the revolving glass door and out onto the front sidewalk of the hotel. The night air was cooler than inside, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and city life. Valet attendants moved between expensive cars while a few guests waited near the curb for rides. The bright lights from the hotel entrance reflected across the polished hoods of black SUVs and luxury sedans. Adrian stopped beside the curb and looked at me. "Where did you park?" I pointed toward the far corner of the lot across the street, near the small row of trees. "The car that looks like it belongs to someone who came here for the wrong event." Adrian followed my gesture and nodded slightly. "I will walk you there." "That is not necessary. The parking lot is about 30 yards away. I can handle 30 yards. Adrian's expression remained calm but firm. "Tonight people saw you standing beside me. It would be strange if I did not walk you to your car." I considered that logic for a moment before shrugging. "Fair point." We crossed the quiet street together, and the music from the ballroom faded behind us until the only sounds were distant traffic and the soft click of my heels on the pavement. My small silver sedan sat exactly where I had left it earlier, squeezed between two large SUVs that made it look even older than it already was. I stopped beside the driver door and turned toward him. "Well, this is the glamorous ending to your pretend marriage for the evening." Adrian glanced at the car, then back at me. "It looks reliable." Reliable is the nicest word anyone has used to describe it. I unlocked the door and placed my purse inside before turning back again. For a second, neither of us spoke. The quiet felt comfortable, not awkward. Finally, I said the thing that had been sitting in my mind since we left the ballroom. "So what happens tomorrow when your observers realize they do not know anything about this mysterious wife?" Adrian's eyes held mine steadily. "Then tomorrow they will try to learn more about her." That answer made me fold my arms lightly. "And what if they do?" Adrian considered that question carefully before speaking. "Then I will make sure they learn only the parts of the story that keep you safe." The seriousness in his voice surprised me. I studied him for a moment before opening my car door. "You know, Adrian Moretti, this has been the strangest wedding I have ever attended." Adrian nodded once. "I suspect it may not be the last unusual evening we share." I sat in the driver's seat with the door still open, my hand resting on the edge of the steering wheel while the cool night air drifted through the car. Adrian remained standing beside the door, the lights from the hotel behind him casting a soft glow across the pavement. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city around us continued moving the way cities always do, distant engines, the hum of traffic a few blocks away, and somewhere down the street the faint sound of laughter from people leaving the reception. It was strange how quickly the evening had shifted from chandeliers and orchestras to this quiet parking lot beside my very ordinary car. I finally looked up at him again. "So this is the part where the mysterious husband disappears into the night." Adrian's expression softened slightly. "Something like that." I smiled a little as I reached for the seatbelt, but did not fasten it yet. "You know, when I woke up this morning, the most complicated decision I expected to make today was whether Lily would want pancakes or cereal before school tomorrow." Adrian leaned one hand lightly on the top edge of the car door. "And now you attended a wedding, danced with a stranger, and convinced several men that you are married to someone you met an hour ago. When you say it like that, it sounds even stranger." He nodded once. "Life has a habit of doing that." I studied him quietly for a moment. Beneath the calm confidence he carried, there was something else there too. Something thoughtful. Maybe even protective. It made me curious in a way I had not expected. I cleared my throat softly. Adrian. He looked down at me immediately. Yes. Earlier you said those men will try to learn more about me. That they will remember tonight. That still sounds like the beginning of a complicated story. Adrian considered that carefully before answering. It might be, but complicated stories do not always lead to bad endings. I rested my elbow lightly against the door frame. I guess that depends on who is telling the story. Adrian's eyes held mine for a long, quiet second. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a simple business card. The card was plain white with his name printed in clean black letters and a phone number beneath it. No company name. No address. Just Adrian Moretti. He handed it to me. If anything about tonight ever becomes uncomfortable for you, call that number. Anytime. I accepted the card slowly and looked at it before placing it inside my purse. That sounds serious. Adrian's voice remained steady. I prefer to be prepared. I nodded once, appreciating the honesty in that answer. Well, in that case, you should probably know something too. Adrian raised an eyebrow slightly. What is that? If you ever need someone to convincingly complain about grocery prices or discuss the correct way to pack a child's lunchbox, I am apparently excellent at pretending to be your wife. The corner of his mouth lifted again in that quiet, almost smile. I will remember that. The moment stretched for another second before I finally pulled the car door halfway closed. Adrian stepped back to give me space. I started the engine and the familiar hum of my old sedan filled the quiet street. Through the open window, I looked up at him one more time. Thank you for the dance tonight. Adrian nodded once. Thank you for saying yes. I eased the car slowly out of the parking space and turned toward the street. In the rearview mirror, I could still see him standing beneath the glow of the hotel lights, calm and unmoving while the city moved around him. I drove the short distance home through quiet streets, my mind replaying the strange evening again and again. When I finally unlocked my apartment door, the babysitter waved softly from the couch and whispered that Lily had fallen asleep watching cartoons. I stepped inside quietly and found my daughter curled under a blanket with her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin. The soft rise and fall of her breathing instantly grounded me back in my real world. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and smiled softly before carrying her gently to bed. Later, after the apartment had gone completely quiet, I set my purse on the kitchen counter and the small white business card slid out onto the surface beside it. Adrian Moretti. I stared at the card for a moment before turning off the kitchen light and heading to bed, because somewhere in the back of my mind I could still hear his voice from earlier that night. The problem with convincing stories is that sometimes people start expecting them to continue.